Russia's Black Dolphin prison houses some of the country's toughest, most violent criminals.
This particular penal colony in the Vladimir region is one of Russia's most notorious.
Пожалуйста, прошу, помогите, кто-нибудь, за протяжении моего содержания здесь 7 месяцев в ЕПКТ ко мне ни разу не приезжал ни прокурор, ни правозащитник, я никого не видел. Администрация просто-напросто здесь у них такая власть, они что хотят, то и делают.
If you want to know what hell looks like, look no further. Hidden deep in the icy shadows of Russia's penal system lies a prison so brutal, you might as well call it hell on earth. It's not just a place of punishment, it's a place where hope goes to die. So welcome to the heart of Russia's darkness, as we take a look inside their most inhumane prisons.
Black Dolphin holds roughly 700 of Russia's most dangerous killers. Combined, they have killed over 3,500 people. It's an average of 5 murders per inmate.
Ask any Russian and they'll tell you how tough the prison system is over there. The Black Dolphin redefines the meaning of tough. This one is one of the oldest in Russia, and it's got that infamous name from the sculpture made by inmates at the main entrance of the prison. The cells in this place have 3 sets of steel doors. One door leads to a larger space where prisoners can exercise for 90 minutes daily. During this time, their cells are raided for contraband or illegal items. Inmates are also under 24-hour surveillance and supervision. They're not permitted to rest or sit on their bunks from the time they wake up until bedtime. That's roughly 16 hours of them just standing in their cells. And to ensure this is enforced, a prison guard goes around every 15 minutes to make sure no one's faulting. The newcomers are blindfolded, so they can't map out the prison or plan escapes. Even when they transfer them between prisons, they're blindfolded. These people are fed soup 4 times a day, and when it comes to escorting inmates anywhere around the facility, they get bent over while a guard holds their handcuffed hands behind their backs and higher than the hips. It's a well-known control tactic, as well as preventing them from knowing their whereabouts. This place houses about 700 of Russia's deadliest criminals, including child molesters, murderers, terrorists, cannibals, and serial killers. But what earned its spot on our list is that the only way you can leave Black Dolphin is by dying. That's right, irrespective of whatever crime you committed. Only convicts on life sentences are brought here. So for every day till they die, they're forced to stand with their hands.
Reiner was, in fact, recently moved to a female penal colony, notorious for horrific conditions, torture, sleep deprivation, and assault.
This is not a building with cells. This looks like a strange village, like a gulag labor camp.
Human rights activists say abuse and torture are common in Russia's vast prison system, with former prisoners of IK2 describing it as harsh, not hygienic, and with little access to medical care.
IK2, officially known as Corrective Colony Number 2, is tucked away in the Vladimir region of Russia, about 60 miles east of Moscow, in a small town called Pokrov. It's classified as a red zone prison, meaning the guards and officials have total control over everything. And you're going to find out why this place is notorious. Saying that it has very strict rules is putting it mildly. IK2 has a reputation for being brutally harsh, both physically and mentally. The goal here isn't punishment, it's breaking people down, piece by piece. And that's what really sets it apart. You see, psychological torture is a big part of their master plan. Inmates are isolated, watched constantly, punished often, and not even allowed to talk to each other. Yet talking can be a punishable offense. And on top of that, there's real physical abuse. Many inmates have been beaten or even sexually assaulted while locked up there. Now, getting sick in IK2 is another nightmare. When a prisoner first gets here, a guard takes away any medicine they bring. And if someone gets sick later, they're usually given a basic painkiller, without anyone checking what's really wrong. It's medical care, but like the bare minimum. Now, inside this place, some prisoners are called goats or activists. They aren't good guy titles. These are inmates who work with the prison staff, spying on others. In return, they get better treatment, like a hot shower, family visitation, and better food. So basically, if you snitch, you get perks. The daily routine, according to former inmates, is a lot weirder. The day starts sharp at 6 a.m. Everyone has to sing the Russian national anthem, followed by physical exercises. So far, so good. But then it gets strange. Prisoners have to memorize the names of all the prison staff and spend 3 full hours making and unmaking their beds. Yeah, 3 hours. The activists are the ones who give out these chores, and they have the authority to search or even beat other inmates who fail to comply. Now after this, they're not allowed to sit or even rest for most of the day. They're expected to stay on their feet until 10 p.m., when they're finally allowed to sleep. And personal time is practically non-existent. Maybe, just maybe, you get like 30 minutes to read a book. But if you're a political prisoner, forget it. You're more likely to spend your day either doing forced labor or being made to watch hours of government propaganda on TV. And yeah, they tie your hands behind your back while you're watching. Getting in touch with the outside world is also incredibly difficult. Prisoners can't receive emails, and every letter they get is opened and read by guards first. That process can take weeks or even months because they want to make inmates feel completely cut off. These guys sometimes get only a half an hour a week to write back, and even then, a guard sits next to them, reading everything they're writing. Phone calls are allowed only twice a month and can't be longer than 15 minutes. And don't even think about talking freely because they're listening, even with your lawyer. These guys can't tell their families what's really going on in here, like we already said. The whole thing is built to keep everything secret and tightly controlled. When you hear the word Swan, you gotta think of elegance, love, maybe a fairy tale. But in the remote Perm cry of Russia, deep in the city of Solikamsk, that graceful image takes a dark turn. Here, the White Swan is no bird. It's one of the most feared max security prisons in the world. Behind these cold walls, hope doesn't fly, it dies. And this is where they send the worst of the worst to spend the rest of their lives, literally, because you don't leave alive. The White Swan was built back in 1938 during the Soviet era. At first, it wasn't meant for these hardened criminals, but rather to house political prisoners, especially priests and members of the clergy. However, this would change in 1955. When those religious inmates were moved elsewhere, and the facility was transformed into a criminal prison. It gets that notorious reputation around 1980 when a new system called EPTT, or single-chamber type rooms, was introduced. That's when they took the most powerful criminals and brought them here to be re-educated. Over 4,500 convicts have passed through these gates. And statistically, inmates here last only 3 to 7 years before dying. So why the name White Swan? Now, there are a few theories. Some say it's because all the buildings are painted white, and it looks like a swan spreading its wings when you look at it from above. Others say it's about the posture prisoners are forced to take, bent forward with hands behind their backs, mimicking a swan's neck. But the most poetic version is that inmates come here to sing their last swan song, which is their final days of life echoing in silence. Now inside, the cells are tight, cold, and clinical. Also kept very clean and spotless, almost too clean, like a morgue. Each one can hold up to 3 inmates, with a single bed facing a barred window and a bunk bed against the opposite wall. A small toilet space is separated off inside. And every inmate gets a box in the hallway for personal stuff. We have some drinking water and a TV that only plays in the evenings on weekdays and all day on weekends. And then a long table inside each cell has a clock on it, not just for keeping time, but to hammer in the haunting rhythm of their slow, endless days. Many prisoners here are surprisingly skilled. Some carve, others paint, and they can sell their work in a small in-prison shop called Cedar, mostly bought by guards. Now, getting placed in a cell isn't random. Each one would go through psychological assessment. Their crimes, personalities, and mental states are all compared before being assigned roommates. Still, it ain't easy keeping dangerous guys closely together. So guards watch them constantly, even if someone just glances into a room through the viewing window. Prisoners have to stand facing the wall, arms raised and legs spread out. That's the rule. Every day, each inmate is allowed a walk. just one. A weekly shower, and no, they're not allowed to just lounge around. Lying on beds during the day is forbidden. Talking to someone in another cell, also a no-go. And unless they earn special permission, they can't work. Instead, they are allowed to study or read, if they choose, using books from the prison's library. Some would try to keep their minds busy, others just lose track of time. But before their time does run out, some inmates dream of having their life sentences reduced to 25 years. Now, legally, that's allowed. But in reality, it almost never happens. The odds are really against them. As for visitation, inmates are allowed their first visits only after 10 years of exhibiting good behavior, but even then it's complicated. Prisoners sometimes give away property, homes, apartments, and cars in exchange for moments of connection with someone from the outside, even if it's a stranger. It sounds pretty weird, but trust us, when you're living in endless silence, you'll trade anything for a voice, a smile, even a touch. Now, here's the worst part. No one has ever escaped the White Swan. Ever. Today it's protected by advanced tracking systems, security teams, and specially trained dogs. The facility operates under international standards, but that doesn't make it easier on the inmates. If someone dies here, and they often do, their family can choose to bury him. But if not, the state does it quietly in the Solikamsk cemetery. So, in essence, inmates in the White Swan are like shadows, breathing but barely living. They once tried to bend the rules of society, and now they're getting bent. Sad way to live, and a sad way to die.
This morning, a former U.S. Marine received a 16-year prison sentence in Moscow for alleged espionage. Paul Whelan says he's not a spy, and the Russians set him up to be arrested back in 2018.
What was it like when you were arrested?
It was surreal. When the FSB stormed into my room and arrested me, it was a shock. And at first I thought it might be a joke. And I knew from what they were doing, the things they were saying, their tactics, that they were trying to get a quick confession, and they were trying to lead me down a road that, was completely false, but also it was all made up. It was a sham.
That was U.S. Marine veteran Paul Whelan, reflecting on his time inside Russia's infamous Lefortivo prison. Following that 2018 conviction on espionage charges, Whelan called it the worst experience of his life. But just how brutal and inhumane is it behind those cold metal doors? Now, the first thing you need to know is that Lefortivo prison is located in eastern Moscow and was built way back in 1881 by Tsarist authorities as a military prison. There's a lot of mystery about why it was built in the shape of the letter K. But in the Soviet era, Lefortivo became one of the scariest places you could end up in if you got on the bad side of the KGB, the Soviet secret police. And even though the Soviet Union is long gone, Lefortivo is still around, and these days it's mostly used by the FSB, a modern version of the KGB, to hold people before their trials. Now, one thing this place is really known for is isolation. People who stayed here say it's not crowded like other Russian prisons, but what it does have is silence. Prisoners are kept away from each other as much as possible, and from the outside world too. There's a central radio system that blasts music across the prison so inmates can't hear each other. And after a 10-day quarantine when they first arrive, prisoners are moved to regular cells, where they stay either alone or with one or two others. Now inside, it's mostly made of metal. The stairs, floors, doors, and even the carts they push around. And because of that, you can imagine the constant clanging and rattling sounds. And to make sure prisoners don't see each other when moving throughout the halls, guards snap their fingers or jingle keys to warn everybody to stay out of the way. Even daily walks happen in pairs, inside a small yard with no roof, about the same size as a prison cell. Now, the cells themselves are very tiny, about 85 square feet or 8 square meters. Each one has a small barred window, and you can use a lever to open it just enough to see a piece of the sky. The toilet's separated from the bed by a low tiled wall, so there's very little privacy. There's a sink, a fridge, and a cabinet to store food from the prison store or stuff sent by family. A table and chair are bolted to the floor in case inmates ever need them. And there's a TV, but it just plays Russian state channels. Guards check on inmates constantly, every 2 to 3 minutes, by looking through a peephole in the door. A former prisoner says the minute you get in here, you're made to feel like nothing. You quickly realize that you're alone, totally under the prison's control, and the only way out is complete obedience. There's about 6 rooms in this entire prison for inmates to meet with people. And that's not nearly enough, considering Lefortivo holds between 200 to 300 people at any given time. And besides, many of them are in high-profile cases and need regular contact with their lawyers. But hey, since prisoners aren't allowed to talk to anyone except their cellmates, guards, or lawyers, they are allowed to send and receive letters. But every letter's read and censored before it gets delivered. Phone calls are also allowed, but the prisoner has to ask for permission, and authorities can deny that request if they want. A lot of famous prisoners have been held here for decades, like the famous Russian writer Alexander Solzhenitsyn and Matthias Rust, a German pilot who once landed a plane near Red Square in 1987. More recently, a Norwegian man accused of spying on the Russian government and a group of Ukrainian sailors were also locked up in Lefortivo. But no matter who you are or where you're from, the second you get here, say goodbye to your rights. Now, it's tough enough to be inside one of Russia's supermax prisons, but it's something else when that prison is sitting deep in northern Siberia, in a brutally cold and unforgiving land far above the Arctic Circle. So, for context here, Polar Owl Prison first opened up in 1961. Now, back then, it wasn't a prison like it is today. It started like a labor camp, and the prisoners here were forced to help build the Salikhard-Igarka Railway, a project the Soviet Union was working on. However, over the years, the camp would turn into a full-on prison and become known for locking up some of Russia's most dangerous criminals, including serial killers and sometimes political prisoners. And because it's located so far out in this freezing Arctic tundra surrounded by endless wilderness and icy mountains, you can just forget about escaping. Frostbite would kill you before you make it a mile. A life at a Polar Owl is just as cold and sinister as the frozen wasteland that surrounds it. Guys, you don't know cold. Winters last a long time here, and the ground is literally frozen all year. People who have been in this prison or even visited say the living conditions are pretty rough. There's not a lot of heat, and the living spaces are very basic. On top of this, the rules are super strict. Since it is far from big cities, it's hard for prisoners to communicate with anyone outside. Mail is usually the only way to stay in touch because things like email or video calls don't work here. Yet that's how the prison kind of wants it, to keep inmates cut off from the outside as much as possible. Now, there's been controversy surrounding Polar Owl. Between 2010 and 12, news outlets reported that some guards may have abused prisoners, physically and mentally, just to get confessions out of them. Some reports say that the prisoners were forced to give fake statements, and it's believed that the local prison authorities try to cover things up, and what really happened isn't fully known. Now, some notable inmates here would be Nikolai Agayev, a Russian serial killer who killed a mother and a girl on the same night, Vladimir Mukankin, also known as the Bloodsucker, and Sergei Ryakovsky, another serial killer known as the Werewolf. Now, these guys deserve the harshest punishment imaginable, and the beatings don't usually come from the guards, but from nature herself, making loneliness and despair their only constant companions.
This is what's known as Russia's Polar Wolf Prison. The colony is considered one of Russia's toughest prisons. Most of the prisoners here have been convicted of grave crimes.
Penal Colony IK3, aka Polar Wolf, is arguably the toughest, most unforgiving prison in all of Russia. It's where the country sends its most dangerous criminals. Serial killers, rapists, pedos, you name it. But it's not just freezing temperatures, disgusting food, or even the physical abuse that makes this place infamous. What truly terrifies people is the system, one that was built to punish by completely breaking the human spirit. Located deep in the Arctic Circle and the Yamalo-Nenets region, Polar Wolf sits in the middle of nowhere, like literally nowhere. This place was built back in the 60s, during a time the Soviet Union's Gulag labor camps were flying. The town of Karp, where it's located, was built by Gulag prisoners, and the prison is surrounded by icy mountains and frozen tundra. It's about 1,900 kilometers northeast of Moscow. The region is so remote you're not going to see any planes or trains getting out there. And for most of the year, it's completely isolated. Even the usual prison mail service doesn't work there. People have to use regular Russian mail to contact anyone inside. And I'm sure you can imagine how long that took, if it ever gets delivered. Now, we have around 1,050 prisoners locked up here, and they're not your average inmates. These people have done the worst stuff you could think of, and are extremely dangerous. Now, some human rights groups would say that the government sometimes sends political prisoners there, anybody who speaks out against Putin, but we'll come back to that in just a moment. The punishment at Polar Wolf is brutal. Inmates say that they're sometimes punished for things that they didn't even do. If one person breaks a rule, everybody may get in trouble. And that could mean being forced to stand outside in negative 20 degrees Celsius weather without a coat. And if someone can't stand still, guards might pour freezing cold water on them to add to their misery. On the other hand, snow covers the ground for most of the year, only melting into dirty slush around May. The landscape is pretty rough, and it's almost impossible to escape, since there's a bunch of heavily armed guards and endless snow that stretches miles into the wilderness. Now, if you're concerned about how prisoners are treated here, let's break it down. As soon as someone gets into Polar Wolf, they quickly learn that their rights have vanished, and that there's no one to complain to about that. Here you may get some beatings, electric shocks, maybe getting locked in a freezing cell with wet clothes, or worse. How about getting shoved into a tiny iron box where you can barely breathe or move, forcing you to lie down in your own urine and feces? Some say that there's sexual assault going on in here too. It's pretty horrifying to imagine, but it's not even the worst of it yet. One of the most well-known inmates at Polar Wolf was CIA puppet Alexei Navalny. He was planted to be Putin's biggest critic, so he was sent off to prison in 2021 on fraud charges that many believe were fake. And then in 2023, nearly 20 more years were added to his sentence for other charges, including funding extremism. But again, this is up for debate. After he was transferred to Polar Wolf, Navalny wasn't getting any Russian support up in here. They threw him in solitary for 10 days just for looking at a guard the wrong way. It was said that Navalny got put into solitary confinement 25 times in just 2 months, and spent a total of 283 days alone in those tiny cells. He was made to share a cell with someone suffering from diarrhea, and another time with a prisoner who had tuberculosis. To make things worse, guards would blast patriotic Russian music at him every morning, starting with the national anthem and then playing a song called I Am Russian by a singer named Shaman. He once said one of the worst parts of prison was being forced to watch hours of government propaganda on TV, about 8 hours a day, while guards yelled at him if he tried to fall asleep. On February 15, 2024, the day before he died, he did appear in court by video, and would even make a joke to the judge about needing money. Now that night, strange things would happen in that prison. Inmates were rushed into their rooms early. Guards searched everything. Even the heaters were taken away. People heard a lot of cars coming and going, including what sounded like an ambulance. And then the next day, the prison claimed Navalny collapsed after a walk and died shortly after. Officials said it was from natural causes, but many people don't think that's the full story. Something about the way everything happened the night before just didn't add up. And his death would prove that once again, when it comes to Polar Wolf, even the strongest minds can't always survive what happens here. There's no better way to explain how cruel IK6 is than hearing it from former inmate Vladimir Kara-Murza. On February 29, 2024, reports said that while Kara-Murza was locked up at IK6, one of Russia's toughest prisons located on the edge of a town called Velogoski in the Vladimir region of Russia, he was only allowed to keep 2 personal items, a toothbrush and a mug. Vladimir, a 43-year-old Russian opposition leader, was sentenced to 25 years in Russia for speaking out against the war in Ukraine. Big mistake. He was locked away in solitary confinement at IK6, where the weather outside often drops to 20 degrees below zero. Inside his bare concrete cell, Vladimir had almost nothing, just a fold-out bed, a metal stool, and a sink. One day, guards randomly decided to add a small cabinet. The irony? He didn't even have any personal items to put in it, like installing a closet in an empty cave. And adding to the fact that he's being watched every second of the day. Another moment that describes how bizarre it is here comes from the moment he was once told to walk across the corridor to collect his bedding. Sounds pretty simple, except prisoners aren't allowed to move their hands from behind their backs when they're outside their cells. So how's he supposed to carry it? With his teeth? Well, that's the kind of trap these rules create, and because Kara Murza used his hands to pick up that bedding like any normal human would, he got punished. Inmates would suffer from sleep deprivation here, constant hunger, lack of medical care, and a pile of confusing rules that make your life miserable. The prison is infamous for mysterious deaths, brutal beatings, and even rapes. In one video, a former inmate said that 6 masked men held him down and raped him with a baton to force him to give up his lawyer. Another inmate, beaten often and starved, tried to take his own life to escape the torture. Those who speak out about the abuse often end up dead, and the prison officials would hide the real cause of death, even when there are signs of abuse on the body. Now, almost anything in here can be bought if you have money. Family visits, fake parole letters, drugs, even time with a washing machine. Families usually send the money straight to the guards or people working with them. And during the day, about half of these prisoners are forced to work in factories, making textiles or breaking down scrap metal. And in return, they get paid around $4 a month. On August 1st, 2024, Kara Murza was finally released in a prisoner swap involving around 24 other people from 7 different countries. But for the thousands of others still locked away in IK6, there ain't no deal coming. For them, there's no escape and no hope of getting out alive. Matrosskaya Tishna is one of the rare Russian penal colonies where inmates have managed to escape not just once, but many times. But still, it doesn't make it any less brutal or inhumane than its counterparts. Back in February 2022, double agent named Boris Karpichkov shared some jaw-dropping details about this prison to the Sun Online. Now, he said he was a spy digging up dirt in Russia. But when the Russian government found out, it kinda took a dark turn. He was thrown straight into Tishna, and what followed were probably the worst days and months of his life. Right after his arrest, he's locked away in a tiny cell for 23 hours a day. Oh, the food is bad. Potatoes had worms crawling through them. He's only allowed for 1 hour to walk around a small, caged-in courtyard. And showers, well, just once every 2 weeks. Now, Tisha's known for holding political prisoners like Boris, and has a long history of big tragic cases. Boris's story lines up with others who've also been stuck in this place. Inmates are completely isolated, and when they're let out for a walk, it's one at a time, alone on the roof of the prison in a tight courtyard with high walls and bars above. There's cameras everywhere, and to keep inmates guessing, the walk schedule changes every day by about 15 minutes, or to let them know it's time. Some inmates even ask to delay their walk if it's too early, like 8 a.m. And while they're walking, loud music is playing over speakers. Sometimes it's European pop, sometimes Christian gospel. Now, the prison cells technically meet the space requirements, but they're far from cozy. A small frosted window covered in 3 layers of bars, a fridge, a kettle, and a TV that's allowed to stay on until 12:15 a.m. The toilet sits behind a half wall, and there's a sink. Every 2 weeks, they can take a book from the library. It's not much, but it helps pass the time. The food, though, is just plain nasty. Breakfast comes with a loaf of half-baked bread that's so gross, most inmates won't even touch it. Meals usually include some cabbage, watery potato soup, and fish. Boris believes that the food had bromine in it, a chemical rumored to lower male hormones. He would eat very little of the prison food, and mostly survived off care packages people sent them. So showers, like we said, are allowed twice a week, usually on the weekend, and lasting just about 15 minutes. If you're lucky enough and the guards are feeling generous, they might give you a little extra time. But even then, some showers didn't even have proper nozzles, just a pipe, dripping water. If you want to meet with your lawyer, it happens in bare, camera-filled rooms. No one knows if those conversations are actually being recorded, but there is a video call room for court hearings. and any personal visit would take place in the basement through a window with a phone on either side. Actual phones are not allowed, and inmates can't make calls. The only way to reach the outside is by writing letters, either through the prison system or with help from lawyers. But even then, some letters never make it out. According to Boris, guards would bang on cell doors every 20 to 30 minutes, day and night. The noise made it impossible to sleep unless you buried your head under your pillow. On top of this, he's given forced medical treatments and is beaten more than once. Eventually, the constant stress and pain become too much, and in a desperate act of protest, not to end his life but to make a statement, Boris cut his wrists. For about a half an hour, no one cared, not until his cellmates started yelling and the guards finally saw all the blood. When they came in, the guards didn't really rush to help. Instead, they beat him with rubber-coated metal batons, targeting his spine. He blacked out, and when he woke up, his arms are still open and bleeding. The guards make him stand up every few hours to show off his injuries, laughing the whole time. He's not treated for his injuries and they continue beating him, causing serious damage to his spine, and now he's got long-term back issues. An MRI would show that he had internal damage to his kidneys. And then for months after his release, he was urinating blood. This guy lost around 25 kilos from barely eating while inside. That's just a summary of some of the things he went through here at Tishna. And remember, he's just one case in over 1,000. Now you're probably wondering how he was arrested in the first place. Well, Boris says that the real reason wasn't because he was a spy. He threatened to reveal secret information after the Russian FSB refused to help move him and his family to Cyprus. Instead of helping him, they arrested him to force him to stay in Russia and keep working for them. They would even try to pretend he'd just disappeared, but a Russian newspaper would publish his photo with a chilling headline: "There's an order to kill a major of the KGB." The article blew his cover and may have saved his life, because after that, rumors spread that crime bosses in Russia and Latvia were being offered rewards to kill him. And after 74 brutal days in prison, Boris is finally released in July 1997. They put him on house arrest, but he eventually manages to escape Russia completely. He made his way to the UK, and in 2008 was officially granted British citizenship. As for prison escapes, only 3 have ever happened from Matrosskaya Tishna. One of the boldest escapes came from a man named Oleg Topolov. This guy somehow broke a hole into the ceiling of his cell, climbed into a ventilation shaft, and then just jumped to freedom. People still don't know how he did it, because these cells are often checked and he had no obvious tools. It's believed he used a spoon, and got some help from corrupt guards who gave him civilian clothing and climbing gear. Topolov was caught the very next day, though, in a nearby park. Velogoski Patak is a high-security prison in Ogieni Ostrov, a small island in Lake Novozhero. It's located in the Vologda region, about 400 kilometers north of Moscow. The site had started as a monastery way back in 1517, built by St. Cyril of Novozhero. For a long time, it was a quiet, religious place. But after 1917, when those Bolsheviks came into power, they turned it into a prison for political enemies. In the 1930s and 40s, the prison held people who were victims of Stalin's purges. And by the 50s, it's used to lock up dangerous criminals who weren't involved in politics. And since 1994, it's been used only for prisoners serving life sentences. This includes any death sentence that was changed to life after 1996. Today, about 190 inmates live here. Many of them are serial killers, terrorists, or even part of organized crime groups. Most of them live in 2x3 meter cells, and each one has a metal bunk bed and a bucket for a toilet, which gets emptied every night. Some inmates are allowed to have a small item like a TV or a stove, usually sent by their families. Now they're locked in those cells for 22.5 hours every day. They get about 1.5 hours outside, and even that time is spent in small cages meant for exercise. There's no shared space, and inmates can take a shower once a week. On top of this, the prison is on an island, and you can get there using 2 wooden bridges or even a guarded boat. It's fenced with barbed wire and watchtowers, and armed guards with their dogs patrol the area. And because of that, escaping is nearly impossible. For the first 10 years, inmates are only allowed 2 family visits per year, each lasting 2 hours. And because the prison is so remote, many inmates lose touch with their families over time. But while it's not as physically harsh as some of the other Russian prisons, the extreme isolation by itself has a deep mental impact. And probably the biggest, most inhumane thing about this prison is that life sentences here mean that there's no chance of parole. Once you're in for good. The only way out is to die. Patak Prison is one of the oldest and most well-known jails in Russia. It's right in the middle of Moscow, and it was built way back in 1771, during the time of Catherine the Great. A famous architect named Matvey Kazakov designed it to look like a strong fortress. It has big red brick walls and 4 towers in the corners. Now, at first, it was used for rebels and political troublemakers, like those from the Pugachev Rebellion in 1773. And later it would become a checkpoint for people sent off far away to Siberia. Over the last 200 years, all kinds of people have been locked up here, from the famous Soviet writers to people who spoke out against the government, resulting in over 2,000 inmates who are currently awaiting a trial that may never come. This prison has always been connected to the darker parts of Russia's history. Back in the 30s, during Stalin's Great Purge, the prison was packed with people accused of being enemies of the state, even if they weren't. Writers like Alexander Solzhenitsyn were sent there. He later wrote a famous book about what happened in Soviet prisons, called The Gulag Archipelago. Another writer kept here would be Isaac Babel, before he was executed in 1940. Even Adolf Hitler's nephew, Heinrich, was locked up here during World War II. But after the Soviet Union fell apart in the early 90s, Patak turned into a jail for people waiting to go to court. Some are petty criminals, others well-known. Yet the prison got a real bad reputation in 2009 when 37-year-old lawyer Sergei Magnitsky died there. Now, Sergei had uncovered a huge tax fraud case involving Russian officials, about $230 million stolen. He was arrested in 2008 and held in this prison for almost a year. And believe us when we say that the conditions were terrible. His cell was overcrowded. He had serious health problems like pancreatitis and gallstones, and the prison wouldn't give him proper medical care. He was treated very badly, both physically and mentally. And unfortunately, he died in that prison's hospital after being beaten and ignored on November 16, 2009. But the story continues because after he died, his former boss, Bill Broder, who had already left Russia, worked really hard to tell the world what had happened. His efforts helped turn the case into a symbol of how corrupt the Russian system might have been. And because of this, in 2012, the U.S. Congress passed the Magnitsky Act, and President Barack Obama signed it. This law banned Russian officials connected to Magnitsky's death and other human rights abuses from getting U.S. visas or using American banks. Other countries like Canada, the UK, and those in the European Union passed similar laws. The scandal forced the prison to make some changes, especially in its medical department. They did get better equipment and more staff, but even today, getting decent healthcare in the prison is still hit or miss, and many other problems haven't really gone away. One big issue is overcrowding. This place is supposed to hold up to 2,000 people, but it often goes way over that. Russian law says that each prisoner should have at least 4 square meters of space and their own bed. But in reality, many sleep on the floor or take turns sharing beds. The cells are usually dirty, damp, not enough heating, and poor ventilation. Clean water is limited, and the food is so bad that the prisoners often rely on their families to send some. Moscow's whole prison system is pretty overloaded because court cases move very slowly and people stay locked up for months, maybe years, before their trial. There were plans in the 2010s to build 2 new jails outside of the city, but that hasn't fully fixed the problem. Accusations of abuse, torture, forced confessions, and corruption still happen, especially to political prisoners, despite some small improvements. Now, to make this prison seem better, they had allowed journalists to visit so they could show off cleaner, upgraded cells. One of these tours happened in the 2010s, but Human Rights would come out and say that it's all for show, and that these improvements don't really solve the bigger issues, like unfair trials and harsh prison rules. This place is very strict. Guards are watching everything. Searches happen often, and the daily schedule is tough. Even though they put fresh paint, the place still looks and feels the same.